Yeah, so for 4 weeks, I've been away, and I'm so thankful for Pastor Park, our senior pastor, who came and preached, for the elders, for giving me an opportunity to step back, to really find out about more of myself, about how I can lead better, be a better pastor. When I was meeting up with some of my friends, I was so excited. I was telling them, hey, my church gave me a sabbatical. And for them, being Korean American, they're like, did you do something wrong? They're like, are you sure this is not some kind of church discipline? They're just joking, right? But this is so unheard of that a Korean American church providing sabbatical for the pastor, and I'm deeply indebted for the time away. Thankful for Pastor Amos, that he was able to take care of things and do things, run things, and such a great... I feel like the only reason why I had such peace taking a step back was because I knew that this church, this ministry was in good hands. And so I'm so thankful for him that we can work together. And, I know a lot of people are going to ask me, what were the highlights of your sabbatical? So you go, I'm going to tell everyone now, right? So don't ask me later. But I'm just kidding. Definitely there are two highlights to my sabbatical. I would definitely say that visiting Chicago was definitely one of them. Being able to, it's where I'm from. My parents, my in-laws are there. Being with my family, immediate family, was a joy because we haven't been together in like 5 years since pre-COVID. My brother drove up from Texas so that we can all be together. And we're realizing that, my parents are getting older, and so we want to make every moment that we have together count. Another highlight was that I was able to visit a prayer house here in America, and that was one of my goals that I've always wanted to check out and to experience. And if you haven't, I really encourage you guys to seek one out. I heard there's one here close by in Santa Ana. I went to one in Pasadena. It was really a sweet time for me. Even the drive there, I enjoy just being able to talk with God, anticipate, what He wanted to show, what He wanted to reveal to me. I felt like I was on a date with God, and it felt like I was able to get away from everything and just get locked in, and it really did help me during that time. And lastly, just super thankful for my wife and just for all that she has to put up with, and the schedule that I have, and taking care of 4 kids. And even when I was at home, I was helping out with driving, and I still cannot remember, what time they start and what time they end. 4 kids, and they're all on different schedules, and it's not like it's the same every day. It's like this, like every day it's like up, down. I'm like, how do you keep track? And when I realized what she does, I was just so thankful for her and what she does for our family. So thank you for that. And, my first week back in the office, I was rested, I was super excited. And then, when that day hit, the day before, I started getting like neck pain. Like, I think I pulled on like a nerve on my neck. And then my back, I was having I think I pulled a back muscle. And then the first day I was like having COVID-like symptoms, I had a fever, I was like dizzy, and I was like trying so hard to like smile and be energetic, but inside I was like dying. And the pastor, some of them could tell, and they're like, is it because it's your first day back? They were like, because you had such a good break that it was hard to come back. But I'm excited, I'm ready, I'm glad that all of you guys are here, and I hope that God will speak to you somehow through me or through the Word. But I want us to do life together. I really want us to grow. I feel like there's other things that God revealed to me, and I want to share later on during the year. But I really want us to push forward together. So let's not be stagnant, but let's be excited, and let's grow together. We're continuing our study on the life of Abraham. And we've seen how messy, how crazy his life is. And I believe that there's something very raw and very vulnerable about seeing a person and who they are at home. There's usually those people who are different in public and they're different at home. But here we're seeing a picture of who he is in his personal life. Pastor Amos talked about how unexpectedly the unexpected happened, and they were able to have a child. The impossible happened. At the age of 100, that's a century-year-old, Abraham has a son that was promised to him 25 years ago. Right? 100 years old. If you're a parent and you have kids and you feel like you're tired, imagine how Abraham must have felt trying to raise a newborn, running around, feeding them, crying, changing diapers, and all that at 100 years old. Parents, I have a quick tip for you guys. If you have a bad day, you always need one family to keep in mind that's worse than yours. Right? That's how you can survive. That's how I survived. When you're going through that stage of having little kids and they're bratty and they're not going to sleep, or they fight against each other, you always have to think of there's someone who has it worse than me. Right? For us, there aren't many families who have more than 4 kids, but thankfully there was one family, and they were always the ones that we would refer back to. The wife I knew from college, and she was one of our teachers in our youth ministry. They had twin boys, okay? And then after that, their third one was they had another boy. And after that, they had another twin boys. So they had 5 boys. And so whenever things got hard for Sarah and myself, we'd be like, just remember them. Man, their lives must be so crazy compared to ours. And so if you're a parent and you have difficulty with your kids, think about Abraham. Maybe this will give you more joy and maybe satisfaction knowing that there's someone who has it harder than you. But now we're looking after the birth of Isaac. And the first thing that we run into is that we see family drama being unveiled here. It's the first thing, family drama. And we know that Abraham is stuck in a difficult situation. He's got 2 wives, right? That's one more than he should. And he's got 2 sons. And a few years now have passed. His son Isaac is now weaned, meaning that he can now eat solid food. And this was a momentous occasion, a reason to celebrate that their son is actually now able to eat. When our youngest stopped wearing diapers, that was like a moment for our family to celebrate. My wife was celebrating because she went through 10 years of diapers, and it finally ended. So this was like for them. This was an occasion to celebrate that Isaac is now getting older. But during this great feast, Sarah sees Ishmael laughing at Isaac, and this makes her angry. This upsets her. Like any parents, some parents are, I'm sure Sarah is like one of those hovering parents and making sure that Isaac is protected and making sure that nothing happens to him. So when she sees this, she gets angry and defensive. The Hebrew verb translated as laughing can be interpreted as mocking. And this is probably a better term to portray what Ishmael was doing. He was mocking his younger brother, half-brother, Isaac, making fun of him. And it's probably what he saw his mother doing growing up. Hagar probably rubbed it in Sarah's face, saying that, I have a son, but you don't, after all these years. Ishmael is a teenager probably at this time, and he does what teenagers do, right? Bullying, mocking the younger ones. And as this was going on, Sarah witnesses this. What's ironic is that even though Ishmael mocks Isaac, laughs at Isaac, if you remember, Sarah was the one who laughed and mocked God. When she heard that, when God said that he would give her a child, she laughed. She mocked God, saying, how can that be at my age? And, Abraham being an old man as well, this is impossible. It's funny because we don't realize when we do sinful things until we see our children doing the acts that we once did. Isn't that true, parents? Right? It's called hypocrisy. That's the danger that I find myself running into all the time. My two sons, a lot of people say, oh, they look like me, but they also act like me sometimes. And when they do things, when they procrastinate, when they aren't doing the things that they should be doing, I get super sensitive. I get super angry. Why? Because that's what I hate about myself. And I don't like to see that in my son because it reminds me of me. And I think this is what was going on with Sarah. She saw herself probably in Ishmael and what she did to God. And so this is what led to her being upset and angry. She could already see into the future that this will not be a healthy environment for her son to be living in. She didn't want Isaac to be bullied. She saw him as the son of the promise, that God promised them that he would be a great nation. And so this feast became a boiling point for her. Sarah gives Abraham the order and tells him to do something that he does not want to do. You know that Abraham, he loves Sarah and he loves Isaac. But on the other hand, he also loves Ishmael because it's his son. And he's helped raise him to be a teenager at this point. But because the relationship between the two women are escalating and it's no longer bearable, he needs to do the unthinkable. But here's the thing that I want us to look at when you look at Sarah. What kind of emotional state was she in? She was very bitter, right? She was very angry towards Hagar and Ishmael. When I look at Sarah's actions, she could have easily blessed Hagar. She could have said, you know what? Well, I'll send you an entourage. Remember, Abraham had 318 soldiers in his own family. He was wealthy. He had food. He had land. He had property. He had everything. Sarah could have said, let's give them some livestock. Let's give them a plot of land that's way, way out there and give them some protection so that she can start a new life. But she doesn't choose to bless Hagar and Ishmael. Instead, she chooses to curse them. And this is something that I want to share, something that I learned, something that was unexpected while I was on my sabbatical that really had an impact upon my life. And to be honest, growing up, I was part of a very dysfunctional home. Parents weren't perfect. They made a lot of mistakes. As a kid, I remember, growing up in the States, watching TV, and when I turned on and watched the Brady Bunch, I'd be like, oh, I want my parents to be like them, right? Mr. and Mrs. Brady. Or, when I watched Little House on the Prairie, I'm like, oh my gosh, that dad seems so amazing. He's so loving. He's so kind. The mom is perfect. Leave It to Beaver. These are all old shows, but the families had the perfect life. And I wanted that, but our family was far from perfect. And I know while I was in Chicago, I wasn't planning on staying with my parents, but some things led to another, and I had to stay with them. And I knew that it wasn't going to be a joy, complete joy, being under their house, under their roof. My father, if you ever met him, we're totally different. He's very critical. He's 84 years old right now. He doesn't express his emotions. When I try hugging him, it's the most awkward thing ever. I'm like, oh, Dad. I'm ready to give him a bear hug. He's like, who are you? Kind of thing, one of those things. When I say I love you, he's like, and then like on the phone, he never says goodbye. He just hands it over to my mom. Like that's the kind of dad I had. And I was like, oh man, it's going to be difficult if I stay at my parents' place. And, one night I was at home and I was talking to my mom. And, all these flashbacks started coming back, all the things that I remember growing up. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to my mom was, why didn't you ever stop my dad from criticizing us or doing things that really scarred us? Mom, why didn't you protect us? And her response was, if I stepped in, then she would make things worse. And so therefore, being silent was the best thing to do in that situation. For me, I took her silence as being in agreement with my dad. And that hurt me because I thought my mom was on my side. I thought my mom was different. And I remember having this bitterness and this anger towards her because of that moment, those moments that I held on to in my mind. There are all these unresolved issues. And in our conversation, I was expecting her to apologize. I was hoping to hear, I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean for you to take it that way. I was always on your side. But that never happened. And I realized that no matter how hard I try, no matter what I want to do, I cannot change the other person. The only person that I have control over is myself. So I realized, you know what? The only thing I can do is forgive and let go. And that to me had huge implications in my life. I was finally at peace. I learned to lay at rest all the bitterness, all the anger, all the past that was brought up while being with them. I learned to let go. And I said, you know what, God? I want to bless them before I go. And that was the only thing I can do. And that changed me. That helped me so much to have a better perspective and a better outlook. And that's something that I want to challenge you guys with. Maybe there's someone that you have anger, bitterness towards. Maybe it's time for you to forgive and learn to let go. Choose to be a blessing, people. Don't be a curse. Don't hold on to that grudge, but forgive. You cannot change them. Only God can do that. Do not try to play God. Choose to be that blessing. The second thing that we see in this passage is the family departure unraveling in this passage. Verse 14, Abraham is left with this difficult decision. He has to sever ties with Hagar and Ishmael. I'm guessing, the night before this all took place, he probably didn't sleep very much because he didn't know when he would ever see them again. Somehow God allowed for this to happen. Perhaps he knew that if they stayed together, that there would always be conflict, that this would not be an ideal situation. In Abraham's heart, he was probably very divided. I'm sure there were a lot of tears that were shed in this departure scene. Abraham raised Ishmael for almost 16 years, and now he's got to send him off. Ishmael is not a child anymore. He's not a baby or a toddler, but he's grown up. He can understand. He can comprehend what's taking place. I imagine my oldest son, who's 18 now. Imagine if I had to throw him out of the house and send him off on his own to never see him again. I'm sure Ishmael had a lot of daddy issues because of what just took place here. Imagine what Ishmael must have been thinking during this time, seeing his father sending him away. But this was necessary. God allowed this to happen because he saw this as being fit. And as Hagar and Ishmael, they're on their way. They're wandering in the desert. And Abraham probably only gave them enough supplies to last them to get to the next town because it would be too heavy for them to carry. But then they make the wrong turn, they get lost, and all their supplies have run out. The only thing left for them is for them to die. And as Hagar is preparing for that, she weeps and she cries. Thank God the story doesn't end there. Even though both Hagar and Ishmael, they were outcasts from their home, God still sees them. Ishmael's name, it means God hears. Apparently Ishmael was calling out. Verse 17, it says, and God heard the voice of the boy. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." I hope when you read that, when you hear those words, that it will encourage you to see that God is watching over you. That you may feel like God is distant, God is nowhere to be found. You may feel alone, you may feel abandoned. But God was there with you. He hears you. He knows you. Maybe you've made mistakes in the past. Maybe you're a product of a broken home. Maybe you were born out of wedlock. Maybe you've been abused. God still sees and cares about you. Listen to the words written by David, Psalm 34:18. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. God is near. When you feel devastated, when you feel like nothing else in the world is going right, when you cry out to God sincerely, God is near to you. Don't feel like the world is falling apart. Don't feel like you've been abandoned. God is near to you. You are loved. God sees you. He has not forgotten you. In fact, God loves you so much that He sent His only Son into our lives. Jesus was on a mission when He came to minister here on earth. It says in Isaiah 61, verses 1-2, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound." God may have sent Hagar and Ishmael away, but He did not abandon them. They may not have understood why things were happening. They may have felt alone, but God provided for their needs. And at the time that they needed most, God gave them water. God helped them to start a new life together. Friends, family, God is there to help you. He will give you the resources that you need. You are not alone. He will see you through. Let's pray.